going to present a case which, very honestly, I mean, upfront and frank, I didn't know this was a syndrome or a symptom or a kind of an entity before I discharged the patient, or even after I discharged the patient. It was just retrospectively, as I was looking up the net, I just started discovering a few things. So that makes it a little more interesting. Probably, I don't know if Zaid may have seen syndromes like these. So this is a case of a 56-year-old male. He was admitted with past history of recurrent lower respiratory tract infections since early adolescence. He had recurrent visits to doctors and specialists all through his adulthood, and mainly for respiratory complaints. So this time in December, we admitted him here at Bridge Candy with complaints of fever, shortness of breath on minimal exertion, cough with thick mucopurulent expectoration with mild hemoptysis. And this is what his X-ray looks like. If you see the X-ray, it's pretty much emphysematous with a lot of cystic shadows all across. This one particularly is quite large, but there are cystic shadows all across the lung. So I'm going to start with the CT from below up. So you're seeing this kind of cystic shadows full of secretions here especially. There's a lot of emphysematous changes. It's like a little bulle, like a large bulle. And this particularly is not classically seen in bronchiectasis, but it looks like bronchiectasis. I would not. Next. Sorry. Similarly, so this is on the base of the chest. Come up. Next. Yes, next one. So as we go up, the lung looked a little more healthier. So basically the base was full of these cystic shadows. Next one. Here you're seeing even at the carina level, there are cystic shadows, but not as bad as it was at the lower lobes. So it was, I usually photograph. The accessibility now has become easier, you just photograph on your phone and it just gets downloaded on your computer. So as I was seeing this CT, I found something which was not quite correct with respect to the trachea. So I thought maybe this guy's trachea is much larger than you normally see. And I thought maybe I'm discovering some syndrome myself. So I went on to Google to just look for something. I called, next. So it was, at the moment I typed tracheobronchomegaly, and here it was Mounier-Kuhn syndrome. I'd never heard of this. So naturally then I went on to reading what is it, etc. So this discussion today is on Mounier-Kuhn syndrome, which is where a patient has tracheobronchomegaly. So in 1932, Mounier-Kuhn associated markedly enlarged airways with recurrent respiratory tract infections. The other names are tracheobronchomegaly, tracheal diverticulosis, and tracheobronchiectasis. This was the first case I had seen, so I thought I should get a little more to it and present this. Next, please. So Mounier-Kuhn syndrome is a rare disorder of uncertain etiology, where due to congenital defect or atrophy of atrophy of elastic and longitudinal muscles, tissues of trachea and the main bronchi, resulting in the dilatation. So, next slide. So this is what you're seeing is normal longitudinal muscles, which are there in a bronchoscopic picture of a normal individual, which are lacking in a patient of Mounier-Kuhn's. As a result of which, there's a lot of laxity, and the trachea, which is usually a stiff organ, becomes kind of loose. So the anatomical criteria for this is when the trachea exceeds more than 3 centimeters in size, the right main bronchus exceeds more than 2.3, and the left main bronchus exceeds more than 2.2 centimeters, then it is diagnostic of a tracheobronchomegaly. So this is the scan done here at British Kennedy, and the length of the trachea is almost 3.6 to 3.7 centimeters. And this is the right and the left main bronchus, which are almost matching the criteria of 2.2 and 2.3 centimeters. Yeah. So coming to the pathophysiology, tracheobronchomegaly is characterized by severe atrophy of the longitudinal elastic fibers and thinning of the muscularis mucosa. This lack of longitudinal elastic muscles results in dilatation of the membranous and the cartilaginous portions of the trachea and the main bronchus. This therefore increases the compliance of the walls and allows the development of broad diverticuli like protrusions of the redundant musculo-membranous tissue between the cartilaginous rings of the trachea. Next, please. So, in a patient, you will see that they have, diverticuli in the trachea, which we do not commonly see. But these kind of patients, because of the lack or because of the laxity of the tracheal cartilage, it causes the retention of secretions and causes chronic infections. Next. So normally in the dynamic radiographic and endoscopic studies, the trachea and the major bronchi distend while in deep inspiration and collapse on expiration. The central airway may virtually occlude with forced expiration and cough. Therefore, there is retention of secretions which lead to chronic infection and some degree of chronic bronchitis and bronchiectasis in these kind of patients. So there is a classification to it. There is type 1, type 2, type 3. Our patient was type 3. So the type 1 is when there is subtle symmetrical diffuse enlargement of the trachea and the major bronchi. The type 2 has more obvious enlargement with bizarre eccentric configuration and diverticuli may also be present. And in the type 3, there are sacculations extended to the distal bronchi, which was the case where there was complete sacculation all across, right up to as low as the lowest possible areas here. So, I mean, there's nothing much in the treatment, etc., but it's a very unusual case of a tracheobronchomegaly. So I'll come quickly to the treatment and everything. The etiology is by and large unresolved. The clinical features are mainly indistinguishable from a chronic bronchitis or a bronchiectasis case. The symptomatic patient would be having, chronic productive cough and occasional hemoptysis, and progressive dyspnea as the pulmonary involvement gets more and more. So, as a result of which these patients have recurrent because of recurrent episodes of infection, etc., and destruction of the parenchyma, they also get hypoxemic. And rarely you will see spontaneous pneumothorax or massive hemoptysis in such kind of patients. Pulmonary function tests usually reveal an increase in total lung capacity with reduced residual volume. Occasionally there are signs of an obstructive airway disease, and in some patients they have even documented normal pulmonary function tests. So the treatment is very little actually intensive antibiotic treatment when they get infection. Asymptomatic patients require no specific therapy, and smoking cessation in such patients are helpful. Inhaled antibiotics like chloromycin, colistin play a role in prophylaxis and infection prevention when the patient gets recurrently infected. But the most important thing was avoidance of steroids, oral and inhaled, which is very specifically mentioned that you must try to not give them LABA with ICS, because that will provoke recurrent infections in these patients and they would require then chronically to be given antibiotics. That's all about the case, I think. Next.
What are the ring shadows?
Thank you.
Those ring shadows.
Those are all dilated bronchi which ultimately become bronchiectasis, destructive parenchyma. Have you? Yeah.
So how you differentiate from tracheomalacia?
Tracheomalacia, very honestly, I don't know. I've not seen a patient of tracheomalacia. Malacia, according to me, is narrowing.
Thinning.
Yeah.
Malacia, thinning of the cartilages and therefore a dilatation.
Okay.
Therefore.
Yes. See, I didn't know this was Munia Kuhn's till I just searched on the web, because I found the trachea to be very abnormally enlarged in size. Thereafter, I just went into looking at it, and I was quite surprised that this was reported in very, very rare cases, very few seen. So I, kind of corroborated and then went on retrospectively to go to CT, go with Anirudh, see the size of the trachea, see the size, and that's how I came to this presentation. Yes.
Any other associated congenital?
So can you just answer that question about the Malaysia versus?
Yes, please.
This is regarding the question which came in about the Malaysia versus the Megali. What we do is when we take the CT cuts and they are through the upper part of the trachea, and we take the AP diameters. And what we see in Malaysia is that the AP diameters, it's collapsible and it's a very narrowed trachea. So when the AP diameters are grossly reduced, and in the expiration phase it is even collapsed, you don't even see the lumen. As opposed to when there is a megali or a regular trachea, because of the compatibility of the rings, there is no collapsed trachea, even in expiration. That is one thing. And for when we have a megali, the AP diameters actually become larger in the tracheomegaly, including even beyond the carina. Also, we get this. So this is what the Munia Kuhn's disease is.
Have you seen the syndrome earlier?
Yes, sir, I have.
I haven't seen one.
That's what
I haven't seen one. I very vaguely knew of it, but there is an entity like this, not by the name of Munia Kuhn syndrome, but just tracheomegaly with bronchomegaly associated with it, presenting generally with recurrent pulmonary infection. I didn't know the name, but it's a Munia Kuhn syndrome. I'm sure it's very rare. And I think what? And I think the way I would look at it clinically is that if you have a patient with recurrent pulmonary infections, this is one thing you should look at.
Yeah.
Or if you have a patient with recurrent cystic bronchiectasis with recurrent infection and large cysts like that,
Yeah.
suggesting
So
large.
we see so many bronchiectasis, but these cysts were so
That's what I mean.
abnormally
That's
large
That's
that
what I mean. If you have something
Yeah.
like that, you should again think of this.
by and large, the treatment remains the same, but
Yeah, treatment
you
is-
just need, the problem was he was getting chronically inhaled corticosteroids. So perhaps just by stopping that, things have improved. I don't know, it's mentioned, but perhaps it is.
But
Worthwhile.
the thing is that the bronchi collapse during expiration, and therefore it's a form of expiratory obstruction.
Yes.
And therefore they present with airways obstruction. That's the way in which it normally would present. But the fact that they get recurrent pulmonary infections means that there is a fair amount of fibrosis resulting from recurrent parenchymal infections. So you could get a restrictive pattern, you could get an obstructive composition pattern.
Any other associated congenital anomaly with this syndrome?
They talk about, I'm just quoting the journal, I'm not Ehlers-Danlos and
Yes, yes, you get it. Any condition where the elastic tissue is poor, you will get it. Cutis laxica and Ehlers-Danlos and even Marfan's are in conditions which produce a disturbance in the elastic tissue of the body, including elastic tissue anywhere, and you could possibly get it in those syndromes. Any other questions?
it's just a, short case because
Yeah.
it was,
Oh gosh.
Okay. A large step, since it's 30 minutes to go, I shall give you the story of the discovery of anesthesia, which I think reads like a detective story. Almost to me, it's like a thriller for all practical purposes. Before the discovery of anesthesia, you must realize that surgery was indeed very difficult. The surgeon had to be extraordinarily quick. He had to finish his operation by 5 minutes because death would occur as a result of unbearable pain, depending also on what the surgical procedure was. Maybe one time I'll tell you of a very famous surgical operation performed in the United States on an ovarian tumor in the absence of any anesthetic surgery. But in major surgical procedures that were performed, including perhaps amputations, this was a commonest surgical procedure because of sepsis in those days. If it was not done in double quick time, the patient was not likely to survive. So the outside limit they would give usually for an average surgeon was about 5 minutes. Death could occur from pain during surgery, or pain, severe pain after surgery, shock, blood loss, and infection. Those are the major causes of death in surgical procedures. Now, of course, even in those days, right from early times, they wanted to diminish the effects of pain, and numerous substances were used. In India, they use Indian hemp. It's something very close to opium. In fact, the alkaloid is exactly like opium. Then came opium, and then came a combination of opium and alcohol. So they used to use this to start off with, knock the patient off silly, and then do the surgery. But even then, with the touch of the knife and the cut produced as a result of this use of the knife would produce such tremendous pain that it was not found to be of very great use at all. So this is how it was. And now we start, and amazingly, the story is not produced, the story doesn't begin with a doctor. It begins with a chemist. It was Priestley who first discovered nitrous oxide. He was a chemist. And Humphrey Davies, you'll remember Humphrey Davies? Davies is the Davies lamp used by the coal miners. They used to go down with the Davies lamp, and if the lamp went off, it meant that there was no oxygen and there was danger and the miners should come up. Well, Humphrey Davies was also a chemist. And he, funnily enough, experimented with this nitrous oxide. He inhaled the nitrous oxide and found that it made him laugh uproariously, and then put him to sleep. And he experimented with it for quite some time, and this was in the late 1700s, and in 1800 he wrote a small booklet in which he said that since the effects of nitrous oxide is to do away with pain, the surgeons should use it for their surgical procedures. But it fell on deaf ears. Nobody took notice of him at all. He said it again and again, but no surgeon, no one in the medical profession took notice of what he said at all. Then came again, not a doctor, but this time a physicist. He was Michael Faraday. And sometime in the 1800s, I can't remember when, he discovered ether. Remember, what a versatile man. Michael Faraday, as you know, is associated with the discovery of electricity. But he was a remarkably versatile man. He was one of the most versatile scientists that ever was in America. And he discovered ether. And he also described on the pain-relieving effects on the inhalation of ether. And he stressed that again. Again, no one in the medical profession paid any attention, though he specifically addressed it to the medical profession. They ignored it. Then everyone forgot about nitrous oxide and ether. And sometime in 1830-40 or so, remarkably enough, the whole subject was revived in road shows. You know what road shows are. You have this Kala Ghoda show, for example. Some of you must have been to it. These are road shows. So there used to be road shows like that to entertain the public, and the fellow who would entertain them would gain money. And the road shows were mainly jugglery, or people who said they were magicians, etc. And in these road shows, there were some chaps who had found out about nitrous oxide. So they would call a volunteer, give him nitrous oxide, make him laugh hilariously, and would do all sorts of mad things, and that is how he would gain money. Now, amongst these fellows who were giving the road shows was an individual who gained great fame. His name was Samuel Colt. I don't know if you heard of Samuel Colt. Samuel Colt, who discovered the Colt revolver. I'm sure you heard of the Colt revolver. It was still there even in the 20th century. The Colt revolver was one of the most famous revolvers that you had, and all the police people, army people used to carry the revolvers strapped to them. He had discovered this Colt revolver and he wanted to publicize it. He didn't have the money, so he took to making road shows. And on the road shows he used to give nitrous oxide to people, make them laugh, make them fool around, and that was how he collected money. He decided this time that he would hire a big hall like this and make it a big show so that he would get more money. But he made a mistake. Instead of taking the usual white chap as the volunteer, he decided to take 12 Indians. I mean, not Indians from India, but Red Indians, the local people, the local Indians there. So he gave them nitrous oxide. And to his astonishment, instead of laughing and behaving madly, the Indians quietly went to sleep. They laid on the ground and quietly went to sleep. He was very, very much worried because there were all these blacksmiths and toughies down there, and they were not paying him money to see Red Indians going to sleep. But he was a sharp fellow. He took one of those wide guys, one of those big tough blacksmiths, called him up and said, "I'm going to try this. And he gave the nitrous oxide to him. The man went very merry. He laughed, he ran around, he chased coal all around the place, and then he fell asleep and fell on the 11 Indians, who were lying on the floor, at which the 11 Indians woke up. And there was great laughter, and the day was saved. But Samuel Colt decided never to do this again. It's too risky a thing to do. As you know, his revolver is one of the discoveries that he made during that time. It's amazing that in the 1840s, just as boys and girls today, take these drugs and heroin and whatever it is, ecstasy and all these sorts of drugs, in those days in America, nobody knew about the nitrous oxide and ether in Europe and in England at that time, in America. They used to take, at these parties, they used to take these nitrous oxide and ether, to get high. Just to get high. And it was a common thing to do. So in one of these parties, there was a young, handsome doctor, very young, handsome doctor, who loved to party more than anything else. And his name is worth remembering. Amongst all the names I tell you, I think this is one name you should try and remember. You can't forget it because his name was Crawford Long. Remember Crawford Market and Long. You can't forget it. Okay? His name was Crawford Long. And at one of these parties, after partying, he found himself on the floor. He got up and he found that he had a severe injury to his leg. And he said, "I didn't feel the pain. I had no pain." They were taking ether. Now he had a patient, I remember